She thought the house was abandoned until the walls started whispering her name. When Elena Moore returned to the quiet town of Marlow Creek after nearly 30 years, she wasn't expecting much, just a few dusty memories. Maybe a photograph or two in her late grandmother's attic. But what she found instead was a forgotten home, cloaked in silence, where time had stopped. But secrets had not. From the moment she stepped through the creaking front door of the old Victorian house, something felt off. The air was colder than the 45-degree fall morning should have allowed. The floors groaned like they remembered her. And on the faded wallpaper in the hallway, her childhood name, Ellie, was scratched faintly in what looked like nail marks. She had left this house at 5 years old, hand in hand with a social worker. Her mother, Marguerite Hale, had vanished without a trace, declared unstable, possibly dangerous, and eventually presumed dead. No body, no answers. Just a headline. Mother vanishes from Marlow Street. But now, decades later, Elena's return wasn't about nostalgia. It was about closure. Or so she thought. Because hidden behind the walls of the abandoned house, buried in the scratched floorboards, and stuffed inside the false bottom of a drawer, were traces of someone who never left. The haunting began quietly, a whisper behind the curtain, the scent of jasmine despite no flowers, a photograph that moved from one shelf to another. But what unsettled her most wasn't what the house was doing. It was what the house remembered. This is the story of a daughter chasing forgotten memories, and a mother whose silence was never voluntary. A true American ghost story, woven through abandonment, mental illness, a mother's secret journal, and a chilling truth that would shake YouTube to its core. So buckle up, because once you hear what was found inside the walls, there's no going back. They say, some houses don't just keep memories. They imprison the very parts of you that were stolen without your knowing. Not all forgotten things fade with time. Some are buried, deliberately, by someone who once loved you enough to disappear from your life to protect you from the truth. That's not abandonment. That's silent sacrifice. And sometimes, opening a door doesn't just lead into a room. It opens directly into a white space in your memory, where you see your younger self, living a life you don't even remember having. As the fragments begin to return, slowly and painfully, they don't just reveal a hidden past, they force you to face the person you became without it. Some people leave behind money. Others leave behind a note. But a rare few leave only silence, an empty house that somehow never stopped watching you. And she, the woman at the center of this story, is about to walk into that house, where everything she believed is about to shatter. Sarah was the kind of woman the world rarely noticed quiet, reserved, living alone on the edge of a sleepy suburban town where even the wind seemed too tired to ask questions. But that all changed the moment she opened her mailbox and found a letter with no return address, no stamp, just her name written in trembling ink. Inside, only 7 words. The house is yours. She's waiting inside. No explanation. No signature. Just that. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. A knowing. A memory her mind didn't recognize, but her bones did. The kind of letter that doesn't just arrive at summons. And from that moment on, nothing in Sarah's quiet world would stay silent again. The sender's name was Margaret Durham, a name Sarah had never seen, never heard, never spoken aloud. And yet, as she stood before the crumbling Victorian house, deep in the woods. Something inside her tightened. The porch creaked like it remembered her. The door groaned like it had been waiting. The rusted doorknob, cold against her skin, fit her hand like it had been shaped by it. And then came the moment that unraveled her breath inside the dusty hallway, above the cracked wallpaper and beneath a foggy mirror. A child's handprint, hers. Same shape, same scar on the thumb. A perfect match from a past she didn't remember living. But how she swore she had never been here. Not once. Not even in dreams. And yet the house seemed to know her. Like it had been holding its breath all this time, waiting for her to come back to something she never knew she left behind. The name Margaret Durham echoed louder now, not as a stranger's name, but like the beginning of a truth she had spent her whole life unknowingly running from. No one ever talked about the house on the hill. Not because it was haunted, because it was forgotten. Perched alone on a wind-scoured slope, where fog clung to the earth like something trying to hide. The house had 3 apartment doors, each one sealed from the inside. No lights, no movement, no records. The neighbors, miles apart, only knew it existed because of the stories whispered by delivery drivers, packages left on the porch, only to vanish by morning. But no one ever saw who took them. Inside, the air was heavy, like breath held for decades. The locks were rusted shut, yet untouched. And the silence inside wasn't empty. It was listening, watching, waiting. There are things we cannot name, yet deep down, we know we once belonged. Sarah stood in the center of the decaying living room, her fingers brushing the dusty frame of a painting she couldn't remember owning, but somehow missed. The air whispered familiarity, not in words, but in sensations, a certain corner where the sun hit just right. The uneven floorboard that creaked with a rhythm her feet seemed to know by heart. These weren't just coincidences. They were imprints, echoes, proof that memory isn't always made of facts, but of feelings too real to fake. And it haunted her, more than any ghost ever could. How do you explain knowing the smell of a home you've never walked into? Or why her childhood lullaby, long forgotten, played from the broken music box sitting on the mantel? Even though she never wound it, the house wasn't just familiar. It was hers, or had been, or maybe still was. And as Sarah moved deeper into the rooms, she wasn't just walking through a stranger's past. She was tracing the outline of a truth someone had tried very hard to erase. But the truth leaves fingerprints, and some memories refuse to stay buried. Because what Sarah was about to find in the attic, sealed in dust and silence, would shatter the only identity she thought she had. Sarah stepped into the house and the air shifted immediately. The wind slipped through a cracked window, whispering secrets only the walls seemed to understand. Her boots echoed against the wooden floor, each step out of sync with the ticking of the old grandfather clock that stood near the hallway, its chime offbeat, like a heartbeat trying to remember its rhythm. Dust floated like ash in sunlight that barely broke through the stained glass. And then, that smell. A strange mix of lavender and smoke, hauntingly familiar, impossibly misplaced. This wasn't just a house. It was a trap door to something older than memory. Her fingertips grazed a doorknob, cold like it had waited. The silence wasn't silent. It hummed. Sarah didn't know why, but every breath she took felt like a lie, as if her presence had been predicted, rehearsed, expected. The moment felt too crafted, too eerie, like walking into a dream someone else had designed, or a life she had once lived but forgot. On the faded wallpaper, just above an antique dresser coated in dust, hung a single photo in a chipped wooden frame. It stopped Sarah in her tracks. A little girl stood alone in a field of tall grass, barefoot, hair tangled in the wind, with a wild, quiet sadness in her eyes. And that face, God, that face, it looked exactly like hers. Not similar, not coincidental, identical. 90% her. Same nose, same tilt of the chin, same storm behind the eyes. Sarah stepped closer, heart pounding louder than the clock behind her. This wasn't déjà vu. This was evidence. But of what a lie. A life erased. The edges of the photo had begun to curl, but the ink was intact, almost as if time had refused to touch it. Who was the girl? And why did it feel like Sarah had once stood in that exact same field, under that exact same sky? Even though she knew she had never been there, unless someone had made sure she wouldn't remember. The first door creaked open with a resistance that felt almost intentional, like the house itself had hesitated before letting her in. Inside, the air was thick with stillness, and something else, something faint but unmistakable. The smell of baby formula, sweet and sour with time. The wallpaper was faded, lined with delicate floral patterns from another era, peeling at the corners like old memories refusing to stay hidden. A single alarm clock sat on a dusty nightstand, its red numbers frozen at 6:47 a.m. And below the time, the date blinked faintly, then died. April 17th, the exact day Sarah was born. She hadn't told anyone that date, not even the lawyer who'd handled the house transfer. She stepped closer, pulse racing, and touched the clock gently, as if it might come alive again. But it stayed frozen, like the room itself had stopped breathing that morning. Who had lived here, and why did it feel like whoever it was had been waiting for her? 3 rooms, like 3 slices of memory. But whose memories? Sarah stood in the dim hallway, heart echoing louder than her footsteps, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The first door had cracked reality open, but 2 more remained, sealed like wounds not ready to bleed. Who curated these moments? Who preserved these fragments of life, as if someone would one day return and understand? It didn't feel like walking through someone else's past. It felt like trespassing into versions of herself she never lived, but somehow remembered. Each door felt personal, yet foreign, like déjà vu with teeth. A house doesn't lie. And this house, this forgotten relic on the hillside, wasn't just showing her a mystery, it was demanding she face something buried, stolen, or hidden from her. But why 3? Why these 3 doors? Perfectly locked until her arrival. Her fingers brushed the next doorknob, and she suddenly knew this wasn't just a house. It was a map. A map back to something she'd been made to forget. And if the first room was infancy, what would the second reveal? Keep watching, because behind door 2, Sarah finds a truth that changes everything. The second apartment creaked open like a confession. Inside a child-sized desk, its corners chewed, a stack of worn fairy tales with torn covers, and a diary left open mid-sentence, like the writer never got to finish growing up. Dust shimmered in the air. But it wasn't just time that lingered. It was abandonment. The kind you feel in your bones before your brain can name it. Sarah ran her fingers over the desk, and in that moment, she wasn't a woman anymore. She was a girl, trapped in silence, screaming into pages no one ever read. The entries weren't hers, yet they bled with the rhythm of her own loneliness. She never came back for me. One line read, etched hard enough to tear the page. The drawing 3 stick figures holding hands was slashed through with red ink. Sarah's breath hitched. This wasn't just memory. It was a message. Someone had lived, loved, and vanished here. And whoever they weren't allowed to leave on their own terms. The sense of isolation thickened. Was this girl a sister? A version of herself erased too soon. The air in the room turned colder. A mirror on the wall reflected her, but behind her a shadow moved. Not wind, not imagination. Something someone still watched, still waited. And there was still one door left unopened. One truth that might be too dangerous to name. But she had to know. Keep watching, because the final room doesn't hold memories. It holds answers. And maybe a warning buried in the middle of the diary, between childish drawings and pages torn from age or rage. Sarah found a line that stopped her breath. No date, no name. Just a single entry scrawled in uneven ink. The girl is still healthy. Today. She smiled when she saw a sparrow fly. That was it. No subject, no writer, no signature. Not my daughter, not she, not I. Just the girl. Like an observation. Like a case note. Like she was a specimen in a forgotten experiment. Sarah flipped back, desperate for context. None. The previous entries were innocent dreams of birthdays, mentions of broken crayons, and songs she almost remembered. But this one, it felt clinical. Cold. Detached. Who wrote it? Why didn't they name her? Why did it sound like someone watching from behind glass? The more she stared, the more she realized this journal wasn't about someone else. It was about her. And this wasn't a memory, it was surveillance. Her pulse raced. Her skin crawled. Because now she wasn't sure what was worse, not remembering this place, or realizing someone had always remembered her. Always watched. And maybe never stopped. The third door still waited. And now it wasn't just curiosity that pulled her toward it. It was fear. Real, quiet, crawling fear. And something else, something she didn't dare name yet. But soon, she'd have to. Because the house wasn't finished with her. Not yet. That night, Sarah jolted awake to the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing just beyond her door. She grabbed her phone, heart racing, and pulled up the security camera feed. Nothing. Not a single frame showed movement. Not a shadow. Not a flicker. Just her own breathing and the hallway lights flickering like they always did. But the footsteps continued closer now. She braced herself, hand hovering above the doorknob, but when she opened it, silence. Then, from the second apartment she'd left untouched, a soft ticking. Her blood ran cold. The old alarm clock, the one that hadn't worked in years, was ticking again. Loud. Clear. Perfect rhythm. No one had touched it. No one had wound it. And yet, it ticked, like it never stopped. She checked the camera again. Still blank. No intruder. No explanation. Just that sound. Steady. Eerie. Impossibly alive. Something in this house was moving without permission. Watching without form. And Sarah wasn't sure it wanted her to leave. Or remember. Or survive. Some say the dead never truly leave, especially when their love was never spoken, never named. It's not just a haunting, it's a yearning. A ghost doesn't always slam doors or flicker lights. Sometimes, it simply waits. Waits for someone to remember. Someone to call it by name. In that house, love had been trapped, buried beneath wallpaper and silence. And Sarah, she was the first to hear its echo. Not in screams, but in lullabies that had no singer. In drawings without names. In fingerprints too small to belong to anyone still living. The deeper she went, the louder the silence became, like the walls were holding their breath, waiting to see if she would finally say the words no one dared to say. Because what if this wasn't just a mystery to solve, but a promise someone long gone was still waiting to be kept? What if Sarah wasn't just the heir to a house, but to a grief too long ignored and a love too sacred to vanish? The question isn't who left this behind, but who was left behind. And when the final door creaks open, when the last truth is no longer hidden, the past will no longer whisper. It will speak, loud, unforgettable. And Sarah must decide, will she run or finally listen? Because what waits on the other side isn't just a secret. It's a name. And once it's spoken, nothing will ever be the same. Ready to see what she finds next? She opened the third door, expecting dust, maybe boxes. But instead, she found life, or the perfectly preserved shell of one. Coats hung neatly in a row, scarves still holding the scent of lavender, boots aligned like someone had just taken them off. And at the center of it all, a portrait. A young woman with eyes so piercing. Sarah froze. Beneath it, etched into the wooden frame, M.D. 1989. Her breath caught. Margaret Durham. But this woman wasn't old. She wasn't from a generation past. She looked like Sarah. Not similar, identical. Down to the slope of her nose, the part in her hair, the faint scar above her eyebrow. But that was her scar. Sarah staggered back. Was this a mirror? A prank? No. The room pulsed with something deeper, like time had folded in on itself. A diary on the nightstand. A calendar from 1993 circled in red. On a date, Sarah couldn't forget the day she was found at the orphanage steps. Her hands shook. This wasn't inheritance. It was entrapment. A loop. A scream beneath the skin of the walls. The name on the frame. The face in the painting. It didn't just suggest a connection. It demanded a reckoning. And as the light flickered above her, and the closet door creaked open by itself, Sarah realized the most terrifying thing wasn't that someone had once lived here. It was the sinking certainty that maybe she never left. And maybe neither would Sarah. In the drawer, beneath old envelopes and yellowing lace, lay a single document that shattered everything Sarah believed about herself. A birth certificate. Fragile. Folded 3 times. Edges curled like it had been opened and closed too many times, by hands that trembled. Her eyes scanned the page, heartbeat thundering in her ears. Mother's name, Margaret Durham. She blinked hard. Child's name, Sarah Durham. But someone had taken a pen. No. A trembling hand and crossed it out. The name Durham was slashed through, like a scar, overwritten, in hurried, uneven handwriting. Sarah Lynn, the name she'd carried her whole life, the name her adoptive parents gave her. But this wasn't a court document. This wasn't part of an adoption file. This was original, ink-stamped, government sealed, and someone tried to erase it. Her identity hadn't just been rewritten, it had been hidden, buried beneath years, names, lies. The room suddenly felt too small, the walls too close. The ticking of the clock in the hallway grew louder, now sounding more like a countdown than the passage of time. What kind of mother would leave behind a daughter, yet keep a room like a shrine? Why had she never been told? And most terrifying of all, what if she had been here before? What if those childhood dreams, those unplaceable déjà vu flashes, weren't dreams at all, but memories clawing their way back from beneath the false life she'd been forced to live? As she clutched the birth certificate, the power flickered, and for the briefest moment, in the mirror across the room, Sarah saw a figure behind her, a woman with her face, smiling, waiting. She wasn't born an orphan. That lie told gently, repeated kindly, reinforced like a lullaby, crumbled the moment the truth stared back at her from the walls. Margaret Durham wasn't some name from the past. She was her mother. Not just biologically, but physically, hauntingly present living, just beyond the veil of Sarah's constructed life. 3 apartments. 3 carefully crafted realities. 1 filled with baby bottles and lullabies. 1 with fairy tales and quiet scribbles in a teenage diary. 1 with scarves, coats, and the portrait of a woman frozen in time. Margaret had lived them all. Not in parallel dimensions, but in silence, in secret, watching her daughter grow from a distance she never dared to cross. Not gone, not absent, but near, always near, like a ghost who never died. Sarah's mind fractured around the realization every creak in the floorboards, every unseen presence in her childhood bedroom, every unexplained gift on her birthday. They weren't figments of imagination. They were Margaret, a mother who, for reasons yet unknown, never claimed her, but never left her either. It was love, twisted by something darker. Guilt, fear. A promise Margaret had split herself into 3 women to stay close to the daughter the world said she couldn't keep. And Sarah had walked through every room of her own forgotten life without knowing. Until now. Until it all bled into one horrifying, heartbreaking truth. She had never been alone. She had only been watching a woman watch her. A woman who carved 3 identities just to stay close without being seen. And now, every lie Sarah had lived collapsed under the weight of the one love she never even knew she had. But why didn't Margaret ever speak? Why didn't she come forward? Unless she couldn't. Each room wasn't just a memory. It was a living shrine, a silent, handcrafted replica of a life unfolding without its maker. The crib, the storybooks, the diary, the scarves. None of it random, none of it accidental. Every detail, down to the creased corners of a drawing, down to the torn fairy tale cover, painstakingly reconstructed by the one person Sarah thought had vanished long ago. Her mother didn't disappear. She disappeared into these walls, into these rooms. Margaret had relived Sarah's life with her, just always one step behind, one wall away, always watching but never seen. She didn't just love from a distance. She recreated the distance, maintained it, protected it, not for lack of love, but because of how dangerously deep that love ran. The rooms weren't relics of Sarah's past. They were love letters, wordless, relentless. Obsessive love letters built in wallpaper and furniture and silence. She had watched her daughter grow from behind veiled curtains, rebuilding each milestone in solitude. Not as a mother who had left, but as a mother who had been denied the right to stay. The heartbreak. It wasn't just Sarah's. It was Margaret's too. Every room a scream she couldn't voice. Every object a memory she wasn't allowed to claim. And Sarah, standing in the center of this puzzle, now complete, realized the most unbearable truth: she had never been unloved, only hidden from it. If that love was strong enough to recreate an entire life behind closed doors, what else had Margaret done to stay close? What had it cost her? And more importantly, was Margaret still here? The tape clicked. Static, then a breath, then a voice trembling, soft, but unmistakably hers. "You can hate me, Sarah. I'd understand, but I could only ever love you." Quietly, invisibly, from where the world couldn't tear us apart again, her mother's voice, preserved in fragile magnetism, wrapped around the silence like a final confession. "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to stand in the light, to be your mother out loud. I built rooms instead of moments, watched shadows instead of holding your hand. I loved you so loudly inside, but outside, I stayed silent." Sarah froze. The ache behind every unanswered question, the absence at every school recital, the silence behind every birthday candle was suddenly deafening. This wasn't abandonment. This was a love too raw, too fractured, too broken by a world that never let Margaret stay. The rooms weren't just memories, they were apologies. The tape wasn't a message, it was an elegy. A whispered goodbye from a mother who never truly left. As the tape wound to its end, one final whisper escaped. "Maybe one day. You'll understand. I never wanted to disappear. I just didn't know how to exist without breaking you." The tape stopped, and in that silence, Sarah felt it. Not just loss, not just love, but a haunting, aching truth that rewrote everything. What do you do when the ghost wasn't trying to scare you, but protect you? And what if she's not gone yet? Some mothers never gave birth with blood, but with longing. And some houses aren't homes, but haunted memory maps, waiting to resurrect the truths we were never meant to find. Sarah now stood in such a house. Every wall had watched her grow. Every drawer had hidden the silence. This wasn't just a place, it was a mother's final breath disguised as a home. And now, the house wanted to be heard. Because memories don't die. When people do, they wait. They wait for someone brave enough to listen. Sarah was no longer just a visitor. She was the key, the air of hidden love and unspoken regret. And as she turned to leave, the rooms didn't feel empty. They felt awake. So now the question is, if this were your story, your home, your buried past, would you dare to unlock it? Would you want to know who loved you from behind the curtain of fear? Drop a comment below. If you've ever felt a presence that couldn't be explained, save this video if it stayed with you. And subscribe, because what comes next might just rewrite everything you thought you knew about family. Sarah sat in the dim stillness of the house, her fingers trembling around the birth certificate. The ink faded, but the truth screaming louder than any name ever could. The old clock beside her, once frozen in silence, had begun to tick again, as if time itself was exhaling after holding its breath for decades. Tick. Tick. Each second clawed at her spine like a ghost peeling back layers of a lie she had lived her whole life. She wasn't abandoned. She was watched, loved, protected from the shadows. And that changed everything. The house didn't feel cold anymore. It felt alive, like it had been waiting for her to sit exactly where she was, to hold that paper, to understand the love that had no name, but all the weight of 1,000 days. This wasn't closure. It was an opening, a tear in the veil, the kind of moment that rewrites a soul. And as the seconds passed, one truth echoed louder than the ticking clock. What you were told about your past may not be wrong. It may be incomplete. If this hits somewhere deep, save this video, share it. Because someone else out there might be holding a silence that's not theirs to carry. She walked through each room, barefoot, as if afraid to disturb the ghosts of memories she never knew were hers. A broken fairy tale book. A school desk stained with ink and silence. A faded blanket that smelled of rain and lullabies. Sarah realized her childhood had been lived without her. Every stage of her growing up, recreated in secret. Not imagined, not guessed, remembered. By a woman who had watched from afar, loved from the shadows. Motherhood lived silently behind 3 locked doors. And now those rooms weren't just rooms. They were timelines. Proof that her life had been witnessed, even when she felt invisible. It shattered her. Because to know you were never alone, but not once held, that's a grief few can name. This wasn't a twist. It was a wound. And as she stood there, the air thick with dust and love, one question refused to leave her. What kind of mother loves you enough to never be seen? And what kind of world forces her to make that choice? If this stopped your breath, even for a second, don't scroll. Share it. Let this echo for someone still waiting to be remembered. On the faded wall, almost hidden beneath years of silence and dust, a single sentence shimmered in dying charcoal. I never left. The letters, uneven and trembling, felt more human than ink ever could, like breath turned into script. Sarah stared, heart splintering under the weight of that truth. All this time, she had believed in absence, in abandonment. But now, in a room built from memory and love, too afraid to speak its name, she realized her mother had been everywhere. In the folded scarves, the ticking clock, the scent of lavender pressed between pages. Love hadn't vanished. It had whispered, waited, endured. And this message, it wasn't haunting. It was a final embrace from someone too broken to step into the light. Viral isn't always loud sometimes. It's a whisper that stays with you. If this line etched itself into your chest, hit save. Because some stories don't scream to be remembered. They just linger. Quiet. Eternal. Like a handprint on a wall that time tried but failed to erase. Sarah stepped onto the porch as dawn broke, her shadow longer than it had ever felt. The air was still. No wind. No birdsong. Just the hush of a world holding its breath. She opened her mouth and for the first time in her life, said the word she had never dared to say aloud. Mom. She didn't expect an answer. She wasn't begging for a ghost to return. She just needed to hear it echo, even if only in her own chest. In that moment, she wasn't searching for presence. She She was claiming it. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been loved in silence, raised from afar by trembling hands and unsent letters. And now, standing on the threshold of the life she never knew was hers, she understood the house wasn't haunted. It was waiting. This porch, these walls, this name belonged to her. For the first time, she wasn't a visitor in her own story. Viral isn't always about what shocks. Sometimes it's what heals. If this moment made you breathe slower, made you think of the names you still whisper into the dark, then don't scroll. Stay. Because some homes aren't built with wood. They're built with truth. And sometimes, all it takes to step inside is the courage to call someone who's no longer there. Just to remember you were never really alone. In the end, she never really left. Wasn't just a faded message on the wall. It was the truth that shattered everything Sarah thought she knew and quietly began to rebuild her. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive with open arms. It lingers in the silence, in the rooms we never noticed, in the years we thought no one cared. And if you've ever felt abandoned, forgotten, or unloved, maybe it wasn't absence. Maybe it was a different kind of love, a quiet one. This story wasn't just hers. It's all of ours. For every viewer holding unanswered questions, for every scar shaped like silence, know this: you were seen. You were loved. If this touched something deep in you, drop a comment. We read everyone. Save this video so you never forget truth has a way of finding its way back. Subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after the screen fades to black.